Hello, my name's Brett Statham. I'm a Microsoft technical evangelist based in San Diego, California. You can find me on the web at brettstatham.com, and also mention you can find a copy of the slides at the link on the screen. And I'd like to start this with a little bit of a confession, and that's that I'm a nerd. I actually love my gadgets and devices and all that kind of stuff. And it goes back to when I was a kid, and some of my favorite toys were toys that seemed like they could do things that just were not possible. You know, phasers that could stun people and that kind of stuff. And I remember, taking things like my walkie-talkies apart and trying to figure out how they worked and putting them back together and all that good stuff. And as I've grown older, I found out, I'm not alone. A number of us have relationships or at least dependencies with the devices in our lives. And we start to have this expectation of being able to communicate with our devices much in the same way that we communicate with the other people in our lives. For example, we might want our devices to be able to send us emails or maybe even communicate through social media, especially if they're having problems or if there's something about them that we need to know. And so we're actually in that world today. We are in a world where we have devices or things that are connected to the internet. So we're in this internet of things. It actually turns out, though, that really only about 0.6 of the total connectable devices are actually connected. So really, we're not in the internet of everything yet. It's not until we start to connect more and more of the everyday objects that we interact with onto the internet that we will then evolve into the internet of everything. And so that's really what I want to talk about in this video. I'm going to start out with just an overview of what is the Internet of Everything, talk about some terminology, and look at the value proposition. Why do we care? We'll come back in and look at some of the devices and things that are connected to the Internet now or that may be coming, as well as what are some of the things that are making that possible. We'll turn around and look at some of the different networking standards and protocols that are available, as well as how the cloud and big data are making it possible for us to deal with the large volume of information that's going to be produced by these internet-connected things. So what is the Internet of Things? Well, this is actually a phrase that just got added to the Oxford Dictionary a couple of weeks ago, back in August 2013. And Oxford's definition of the Internet of Things is a proposed development of the Internet in which everyday objects have network connectivity, allowing them to send and receive data. So there's a few interesting points to take from that. First of all, it's a proposed development. That means this is not a done deal, right? We have the ability to inject ourselves into this process and affect it. The other thing is that it's focused around everyday objects and adding value to them by connecting them to the network and letting them communicate with us by sending and receiving data. Now, Cisco is a company that's done a lot of thought work around this, primarily because they provide or make possible many of the networks that these devices will connect to. And Cisco has their own definition for this. It says it's about bringing together people, process, data, and things to make network connections more relevant and valuable than ever before. So what's interesting about that one is that it's a more network-centric view of this. It's about adding value to the network versus the previous definition was about adding value to things. And that's really true both ways, right? It kind of depends just on what your perspective is. But either way, we're increasing the value of things or networks. Now, in fact, the phrase Internet of Things was first used by a guy named Kevin Ashton in a presentation he gave at Procter & Gamble back in 1999. And it's one of those situations where, he used the term and then people kind of hijack it and take it to mean something other than his original intention. And so later in 2009, Kevin wrote a follow-up article on this and said, hey, look, I don't claim the phrase, but here was what I meant by it when I said it first. And in that, he says, if you go out and look at the internet today, the vast majority of the data that's out there was created by humans for humans. And it's really around our concepts and our ideas, right? It's documents that we've created, it's pictures that we've taken, it's video that we've recorded, whatever. But if we want to be able to increase the value of the things that we interact with, by letting them tell us that we can use them more efficiently or that they need to be repaired or that they've reached the end of life or something like that, then in order for that to happen, those devices have to evolve. We need to empower those things with sensors and computing power so that they can, as Kevin says, see, hear, and smell the world for themselves in all its random glory. right? And that's really what we're talking about with the Internet of Things, or the Internet of Everything, giving all of these devices or all of these things this ability to communicate with us in a meaningful way. So a number of different names for this. I've mentioned the Internet of Things, but as I said, really, it's just some things that are currently connected. So that's really where we're at right now, is the Internet of some things. It's not until we start to connect more and more of the connectable devices that will evolve into the Internet of Everything, or IoE. These are not necessarily brand new concepts, though. Previously, we've talked about ubiquitous computing and pervasive computing, as well as I mentioned, there's other perspectives on this, right? So if I'm looking at this more from a device to device or machine to machine type of communication layer, it could be that I'm coming this from an industrial perspective, and I'm talking about the industrial internet. But at the core, that's really what we're talking about, is having things that can connect and communicate with us. So as we talk about connected things, how does that relate to connected people? And back in 2003, that blue dot represents sort of a model of how many people were connected to the internet, versus the orange dot is a model of how many things were connected to the internet. And you can see that there were significantly more people connected to the internet than things back in 2003. But in 2008, we crossed a threshold where there were more things connected to the internet than there were people connected to the internet. And in fact, if you take it up to now, in 2013, where there's an estimated 10 billion connected devices on the internet, compare that to a total world population of only 7 billion. And that means that there's more connected things on the internet than there are humans on the face of the earth. Now, Cisco predicts that this explosion will continue up to, say, in 2020, where there's an estimated 50 billion things that are connected to the internet. And if you look at that gold circle and think about what made that explosion possible, it's that we were either adding value to things by connecting them, or from Cisco's perspective, we were adding values to the networks by putting more things on them. But either way, it's value, right? And so that value could be in gained efficiencies, that we're using the things that we have more efficiently. Imagine the smart stapler, right? Where I could have the stapler tell me, hey, I'm about to run out of staples, so I can make sure that I've got staples on hand. And that means that when the stapler does run out of staples, it doesn't sit there unusable and therefore with no value. I get to maintain continuous value out of that stapler while I have it. Right? Or it could be that I'm getting cost savings. For example, maybe my power network can let me know, hey, by the way, your utility just dropped the current price based on demand. And so now would be the time for your washer, maybe even to turn itself on and run itself at those lower demand times. Or it could be that the value that we derive is by creating the devices or the networks themselves. But regardless, there's a lot of value there. In fact, Cisco predicts that there's as much as $14.4 trillion at stake over the next decade. And in 2013 alone, there's about $1.2 trillion of value at stake, but over 47% of that is being left on the table. If you look at that from a device perspective, there's 99.4% of the connectable devices that are still unconnected. So if we have already 10 billion things, that's only 0.6 of the total connectable things. That means there's about 1.5 trillion connectable things that are out there. Divide that by a world population of about 7 billion, and that means that each person has about 200 connectable things available to them. So it's pretty impressive. So what are some of the things that are making this all possible? Right. Well, first of all, good old Moore's Law, right? You can't have a tech talk without bringing in Moore's Law. Moore's Law basically says that the density of transistors is going to, or in any given area, is going to double about once every 2 years. Now, there's a point at which Moore's Law is going to reach maximum density, where it just can't continue to escalate. But if you listen to futurists like Ray Kurzweil and others, we'll move beyond sort of silicon-based computing into other nanotechnologies, and we can reach powers of computing that are exponentially higher than what we currently have. So increasing computing power is part of this. Of course, at the same time, being able to allow these computing devices to communicate with less and less energy required. So a big part of the energy expenditure to these devices goes to the communications. And if we can make those communications cheaper by making the wireless consume less power, that's a big plus. And in fact, the processor itself could consume less power. So not only can it do more, but it can consume less as it does so. Other enablers include standards, right? So there's a number of wireless standards as well as communication and management standards that are coming out. We have the ability and availability of cloud computing to take these analysis workloads and put them up into the cloud and let those processes run there, as well as the ability to store large volumes of data up in the cloud. Crowdfunding is another one. As we take these devices that we've invented, crowdfunding gives us one financing option to take these prototypes and sort of move them over to production. And then finish up with a great collection of tool sets and libraries, as well as the availability of rapid prototyping, things like 3D printers and milling machines. But not just that, the prototyping boards like Arduinos and NetDuinos and the like. So let's go back and take a look at some of the different devices and things that are coming around. And I'm going to start out with sort of a personal perspective on that, thinking about the devices that you as a person may interact directly with, right? And in fact, there's a whole movement around this called the quantified self, basically being able to use devices that help you understand your own actions. In fact, you can go to quantifiedself.com and find out about that. But one device I imagine most everybody's heard about is the Fitbit. This is a device that you can just clip onto your clothing and wear with you throughout the day. And it's going to track your activities, let you know how many steps you've taken, help you estimate, calories burned and that kind of stuff. But these can do more and more, right? In fact, they even have versions that you can take to bed, and it can help you measure how well you've been sleeping at night. Add to that things like smartwatches from a number of companies, including Garmin, that have GPSs built in and can track your position throughout the day. And this is great for runners and hikers to be able to sort of track the routes that they went on. If we're thinking about health and wellness, though, another part of how many of us view that is through our weight, right? And so there's Wi-Fi scales that can take the measurements and broadcast them through your Wi-Fi network up to a service so that you can then analyze and log this on an ongoing basis. What about the things we see? You probably heard about GoPro or Look-See, those types of things. Those are press to record cameras though, right? So I have to actively push the button to record something and then push it when I'm done. And if I'm not at recording, it's not capturing anything. Momoto, though, is a different device. This is about the size of a key fob that, for your car alarm. You just clip it onto your clothing, and about once every 30 seconds, it's just taking a picture of whatever's in front of it. And of course, then I can take those and upload them and share them, or just simply archive them or whatever. And so if you start to look at that, I have Fitbits that's telling me, about my health status. I have watches that are telling me where I were. I have cameras that are taking pictures of what I'm seeing in front of me. And I can actually start to build a very fine, detailed record of really my existence, as well as a way of quantifying or placing numbers around my behavior and my well-being. In fact, we can go to the extent of how fast I eat. The Happy Fork is a device that measures how fast you're moving it up and down towards your mouth. And if you're eating too fast, it can buzz to warn you that you need to slow down. And of course, it logs that information so I can analyze it later. Cube sensors help me measure the environment that I'm in, right? These are little cubes that you can place on the end tables and things like that throughout your home or office space, and it's measuring air quality and temperature, humidity, that kind of stuff, and again, allowing me to report on that. So that's interesting in and of itself, but this starts to get interesting even more so when we connect it to other things. For example, what if I used the data from cube sensors and fed that into a smart thermostat so that my thermostat could more efficiently control the environment in my home? Or if I could take that data and correlate it with the information coming back out of the Fitbit and analyze how air quality affects my sleeping habits. Yeah, kind of interesting. We can continue this down to the things that we own. Tile is a little device that you can tack onto your keychain or onto the back of your backpack or whatever, just to track items. So if you lose something, you can go up to the service, find out where was this thing seen last, so that you know where to go find it. And something very similar, there's the tag for your pets that you can strap this smart collar on, and if the pet were to get lost, you can go to the tag site to figure out where your pet is. So this is pretty impressive, and this is just an extremely small sampling of some of the different types of devices that are available, around your person. There's whole media sites. For example, Crunchware is a site that sort of tracks these types of devices, et cetera, out there. So there's an entire industry sort of springing up around this. It's not just about things that you can buy, though. I mentioned this everyday objects concept. And Andy Stanford Clark is sort of one of the thought leaders around just the Internet of Things in the first place. There's a great video. There's a link to it there at the bottom of the slide that he did for TEDx Warwick. But in that, Andy talks about how he lives in a 16th century home on the Isle of Wight in England. And one of the problems that he has is mice, right? So he can go place mouse traps throughout his home. But the problem with that is he doesn't know if he's caught a mouse unless he goes back and inspects all the traps. So he said, well, hey, let's make a smarter or a better mousetrap. So in this case, his problem was that, he had mice. And so we add to that an everyday device like a mousetrap. And we can hook a couple of wires up to that mousetrap such that the circuit is closed when the trap is set and the circuit is open when the trap is tripped. I can take those leads and feed them into something like an Arduino and then write some simple code that once connected to a wireless network can send out a tweet whenever the trap gets tripped and I've caught a mouse. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. I've now have the tweeting mousetrap from that. And what's really interesting about that is that, Andy Stanford Clark is an amazingly, intelligent person, IBM distinguished engineer, and certainly has high credentials. But this is not beyond the reach of really most anybody, right? The programming languages and the availability of the hardware and certainly the mousetraps to make this possible is really extremely accessible. And even something that with a simple set of documentation, a kid could do. So that really gets us into this idea of, I could do that. And that gets us into sort of this maker revolution. And this is a big part of, I think, what's making these devices possible is that people start to believe that they have the power, the tools that they need to make things happen. Part of this centers around a magazine called Make Magazine, and I've been a big fan of Make since the beginning, subscriber since the first issue out there. Of course, this is not the only audience or demographic out there around sort of the quote-unquote maker revolution, if you will. But as I said, I've been a big fan. For example, I've worked on tons of projects with my kids. We've done cigar box guitars and compressed air rocket launchers and potato cannons and all that kind of stuff. But most of the devices that I pictured there aren't actually connected. The one in the bottom right-hand corner, though, is. That's a cardboard box, right? There was recently, just last year, a solar eclipse. And so I used some cardboard boxes with the kids, cut holes in them, stuck some tin foil over the holes and poked pinholes in them so that you could look in the box and see an image of the solar eclipse. And I thought, well, hey, let's go ahead and hook up a device like my phone, give it its own little portal that it could view the solar eclipse through. And now I have the internet-connected cardboard box, right? This phone had the ability to then take pictures and upload those up to the internet. So I don't know what's more everyday than the cardboard box, right? If you look at that, you go, yeah, but dedicating a phone to every cardboard box you want to connect is maybe a little bit of overkill. And so there's prototyping systems like the Arduino, the NetDuino, BeagleBoard, Raspberry Pi, as well as a whole industry that's sprung up around providing shields and sensors and different types of things that you can do around these prototyping boards out there. And it makes it very accessible for somebody, even with minimal to no electronics knowledge, to be able to sort of plug together the right types of sensors and write some basic code to be able to prototype their devices. Add to that the ability to print enclosures or physical aspects of the devices using more and more readily available 3D printing and milling machines. So these are getting down into the $500 or $600 price range, so well within the reach of many. Now, I'm cheating a bit. The one that's on the screen right here is the MakerBot Replicator 2. This one's probably more in the $2,100 to $2,200 price range, but still within the reach of many. And this device here is getting down to where it can print with 100 micron precision. So we can print very fine, very precise objects with a consumer level device. Really impressive stuff out there. And you go, great. Okay, well, $2,000 may be cheap to some, but it's not cheap to me. There's whole businesses that have sprung up around making this technology available to the normal person, right? So I'm in San Diego. Here's an example of just two places in San Diego, Maker Place and Fab Lab. And these allow you to, on different payment models, come in, learn how to use the tools, and then be able to use the tools at their space. And these aren't just for adults, right? Some of these places get grants for STEM or STEAM education and can offer amazing programs to kids. For example, Fab Lab here in San Diego had summer programs where kids could go in, elementary age kids could go in and learn about Arduinos and Arduino programming and that kind of stuff, and 3D printing. So just some really amazing stuff that I wish I had access to when I was that gadget crazy kid. So you look at that and you go, okay, great. You know, I can use Arduinos or Netduinos and 3D printers and basic things to be able to sort of prototype a device. And although Arduinos may be inexpensive for one, they're not an inexpensive component in a production product. You don't stick an Arduino in a high volume production product, and you don't 3D print all your enclosures. I have to get from sort of that prototype stage into a production phase, and that takes money. It takes engineering, it takes production costs, it takes marketing, building the supply chain, establishing your sales channels, all that kind of stuff. And now there's companies that help, but as I said, it takes money. And crowdfunding is one of the ways that's growing popular as to how these companies can get their money. Now, one of the more popular crowdfunding sites is a site called Kickstarter. Since they started back in 2009, they've hosted over 48,000 projects. Pretty impressive. And had 4.8 million people pledge money on those projects for a grand total of $777 million pledged back in 2012, right? So that's pretty amazing. Now, Kickstarter's an all or nothing site. So when you present a project on there, you state a goal amount and people pledge against that goal. If you reach your goal, you get your money. If you don't reach your goal, the pledgers keep their money, right? And you don't get anything. But there's still been 44% of all projects that have reached their goal for a grand total of $274 million, or over $250 million collected in 2012 there. So that's, again, pretty darn amazing to see. And what's interesting is Kickstarter's not the only one. There's a number of other crowdfunding sites that are out there, and even open source crowdfunding toolkits that you can use to crowdfund your own project on your own site if you want to. So it's not just about individuals and makers and that kind of stuff. Other organizations and other industries get into this for medical use. An example, Corventis has a patch that you can stick over your chest, and it'll transmit heart rate information down to a wireless transmitter that you just keep with you. And then it can then forward your heart information off to your medical professional. Another one that I think is really interesting, this is one called Glow Caps. And I'm going to go ahead and play this video. It's from Glow Caps, and you can get to it using the link on the screen down there at the bottom there. I think this is a great example about how rethinking a very simple everyday object, and that's just the cap on the pill bottle, rethinking the cap on the pill bottle, and what that can do to sort of change how people interact with each other and what their relationship is with their medicine. So let me go ahead and play this.
Hi, my name's Samantha, and this is my family. Grandpa's great. The problem is, he isn't so great about taking his pills. You'd be totally amazed at how many people don't take their prescription pills as often as they're supposed to. But nowadays, my grandpa's got it all figured out. With a little help from his doctor, my supermom, and one of the coolest things I have ever seen. Ta-da! Glow Caps. Glow Caps are internet-connected pill caps that go on regular pill bottles and tell you when it's time to take your medication. Glow Caps helps to motivate Grandpa to take his pills in different ways. Reminders, being accountable to his doctor, the support of his family, and automatic refills. For Grandpa, having Glow Caps is like having his own coach help get the best out of him every day. Here's how it works. When Grandpa goes to the pharmacy, he gets Glow Caps which fit onto each pill bottle. He also gets a reminder light to plug in where he keeps his medication. The cap and the reminder light talk wirelessly to each other and connect to the internet. There are no buttons to press or computers needed. Grandpa just called on the phone and set up exactly when he needs to take each pill. Now, each day when it's time for Grandpa to take his heart pills, the Glow Cap pulses with this light. If he doesn't see this light for some reason, the Glow Cap plays a ringtone, kind of like a cell phone. Now, here's where it really gets cool. If Grandpa misses a pill, the Glow Cap will call his home phone as a reminder. Andy gets a printed progress report every month in the mail that shows how he's doing with his pill taking so he can measure his progress. And Grandpa's not the only one who keeps track. Grandpa's glow caps automatically share his progress with other people who care about his health, which include his doctor and us, his family. Grandpa says that since he knows his doctor knows, he feels more accountable, and it makes it easier for him to stick with his meds. My mom is also in the loop about Grandpa's adherence. Each week, she gets a summary of his pill taking in an email. This gives my mom a little peace of mind. One more thing, glow caps notify Grandpa's pharmacy before his medication runs out, so his refill is waiting. The technology is cool for like a million reasons, but you kind of have to ask, why does Grandpa want to take his pills every day? My grandpa doesn't have a million reasons for that, just 5, but I guess that's enough.
Well, I mean, that's pretty cool, right? So look at that. It was simply rethinking how the pill cap works and what it does for us and how it can add value to our life. And with that, we were able to make sure that, Granddad was healthy. So that's a big plus, that we're getting the value out of the medicines that we're paying for, that his doctor is able to better serve his patient by knowing, how well the patient's being medicated there. The daughter's more comfortable because she knows, that her dad's keeping up on her pills. And there's even a convenience in there, right? When the pill bottle is starting to get empty, the pharmacist already knows about it and can renew the prescription. So, I mean, that's pretty amazing to get that just out of, how we rethink the cap on a bottle. Of course, moving into other industries, the smart grid and how your home interacts with the power grid that you're plugged into. So I'm here in San Diego, and SDG&E is our power company down here. And a couple of years ago, they came and replaced our old analog meters with the spinning dials on the side of the house with a smart meter. And so with the analog meters, the way they get my power consumption is by sending around a meter reader who would look at, sort of how much I've consumed since the last time. And then I was kind of billed on that consumption, which is unfortunate because even if I lowered my usage, I'm still being billed at the previous rate. And so with smart meters, my meter can measure my actual usage and transmit that up to receivers that are built into the power network itself. And those can then forward my usage information back to the distribution centers. And that's great for me because that makes sure I'm being billed more efficiently, but the distribution center can now aggregate that information about all the homes that it serves and make sure that it's meeting current demand. There's also this necessity to make sure that we're doing that safely, right? And how much power you can shove through a power line depends greatly on what the current weather conditions are. So we can build environmental sensors into the power network that's able to convey that information, again, back to the distribution centers. And they can then make sure that they're supplying enough to meet the current demand, but doing so within safety guidelines. I can then also make sure that I'm properly allocating for power that I generate myself. For example, if I've put solar panels on my home, or that I'm able to meet high demand loads, like when I plug in my electric car. And in fact, what the heck, the electric car could be connected and communicating with me as well, right? So this just continues and goes on and on. And so there's so many other industries and so many other applications for this. We have predictive maintenance, having devices being able to tell you, hey, it's time for you to come in and fix this because I'm starting to wear down on this certain aspect. We have automated transportation, smart cars and smart transit. We have the military and homeland defense, smart city, smart home, smart grid, agriculture. We can have smart cows and smart corn simply by connecting devices even to these various things. So how are these various devices going to communicate with each other? What are some of the networking protocols and standards that are going to make this all possible? And so really one of the first questions we have to ask is, what are these devices going to communicate with? So we've really got two things. We've got people and we've got machines or things, right? And so people can certainly communicate with people across the internet. That's that P2P type connection. And we're doing that already, right? Social networking, email, Skype, etc. It's sort of the current workload that we're placing on the internet. People can, of course, also communicate with their things, right? For example, home automation. Maybe I have an app on my phone. I can push a button and it'll turn on a light in the corner. Or it could be that it's the machine talking to me. It's my stapler telling me, hey, I'm running low on staples. Go pick some up. And then finally, of course, these machines can talk to each other. And this is that M-to-M communication I mentioned earlier. An example of that would be my home talking to the power distribution network. We saw that in the smart grid. It could be two cars that are driving down that are smart, one car being able to tell the other one, hey, I'm about to turn left, right? Or being able to tell all the cars around it that it's about to turn left, right? So a number of different sort of communication pathways, and that'll change sort of what the communication protocols look like as we go back and forth between them. Another problem that we have is as we connect more and more devices to the network, we have this requirement for each internet-connected device to have a unique IP address. And Internet Protocol is, again, the protocol that we use on the Internet, and it's through the Internet Protocol that we assign individual addresses to each targetable node on the Internet. And the previous version of IP was IPv4. And the addresses in IPv4 were 32-bit numbers. And so if I take those 32 bits and I fill them all in with with ones, and then convert to decimal, we end up with a decimal value of basically about 4.3 billion addresses. And in fact, we had some inefficiencies in how those addresses were allocated, et cetera. And so we had a problem. We didn't have enough IP addresses. Remember, I mentioned in 2013 alone, we already have 10 billion devices, but IPv4 only had 4.3 billion addresses. So there's some solutions for this. First of all, not every device connects directly to the internet. We'll talk about that coming up here. But we also had IPv6 come to the rescue. And IPv6 is a 128-bit address space. So you take those same 128 bits, turn them all onto one, and then flip it over to decimal, and you get this insane number here, which is 340.3 undecillion addresses. And I didn't know what undecillion was. I had to go look that up in Wikipedia. So here's the names for all those numbers from the hundreds up to the undecillions. And you say, well, man, you're talking about connecting all of these devices, Brett. You know, aren't we still at risk of running out of address space? Well, I won't say no, but remember right now, we're only talking about trillions of connectable devices. So we're all the way over here on the right, down here in this number space, right? And that's devices. What about people? There's only billions of people. I mean, come on, just billions. And so, in fact, if you look at that, we have significant room to grow into this address space. In fact, you could have 340 septillion trillions and still fit within this address space. So I think we're good enough for now, or at least good enough, as I say, until it's somebody else's problem, right? So as you look at the different wireless networking standards that are out there, Bluetooth, you probably heard of, I'm sure, NFC, RFID, there's others that are more specific to sort of this machine-to-machine or device-type connections. Zigbee is an example of one of those. And if you think about sort of how you work with your devices in your home, you know, maybe I take my laptop and I connect it up to my phone, or let's say my Fitbit, using Bluetooth. And so my Fitbit can communicate with my laptop and upload its data over this low power, near distance wireless connection. And then I have a similar relationship between my laptop and my other immediate devices. And maybe those devices even communicate with each other. My Fitbit could also talk to my phone, and that's true. So I sort of build my own little mesh network between me and my devices, right? Of course, within my home, my other family members have their own little mesh networks as well. But not every single one of those devices connects directly to the internet, right? It's maybe my laptops alone that connect to my home router, and my home router then is what connects me out to the internet there. So all of these devices are really coming in through a single network connection point out on the internet. Add to those wireless standards a number of communication standards. Dr. Andy Stanford Clark, he of the tweeting MOUSETRAP that we talked about earlier, as well as a colleague Arlen Nipper, back in 1999 started work around this communication protocol called MQTT. And if you think, for example, of sort of one of the predominant protocols on the web today, that's HTTP. That's a communication mechanism that we use over the network, which is the internet, and through HTTP, we can transmit different types of data. We can send pictures and words and audios and videos and all that kind of stuff, right? So MQTT isn't about the payload, it's about the protocol. And so you could, through MQTT, transmit, kind of any data you wanted to. It stands for Message Queuing Telemetry Transport, and it's a lightweight broker-based publish and subscribe protocol. And that means that the broker-based means it's kind of queuing. So two devices could communicate through this intermediate broker, even if one of the devices wasn't available. And in fact, one device could communicate with multiple devices because one device can publish its messages and the other ones can subscribe to them. It's built for intermittent, low power, low computing power type devices out there. So it's very efficient, etc. I mentioned that they started work on this back in 1999, but it has been proposed as an OASIS standard. So that standardization process is occurring now. So that's how do they send data back and forth between these machines. Another question is how do we discover and manage the various devices that are on the network? And the Open Mobile Alliance, or OMA, has the device management working group that's working on those protocols and standards for being able to do device discovery, device management, command and control, that type of stuff as well. Add to that a number of libraries and tools. For example, Eclipse.org has a whole site dedicated to frameworks and plugins for their development environment, as well as collections of libraries that you can use, for example, in .NET, with the Arduino, etc., available on the MQTT.org website. So all these devices now can connect. We've got communication protocols. We can ship data back and forth. We can discover them, all this great stuff. That sounds like a lot of data, though, right? If we're going to have 1.4 or 5 trillion devices and they're all shipping this data back and forth, what are we going to do with all that data? And so to start this conversation, I wanted to first kind of get an idea of how much data is out there now. And I had a hard time getting a good, clear number that seemed realistic. And so rather than sort of picking one I didn't like, I just picked one of Microsoft's properties, and that's Outlook.com, right? And they recently went through migration of their Hotmail users over to Outlook.com. There were 400 million active accounts, and there was over 150 petabytes of email that had to be transferred. 150 petabytes, and that's just on one internet property. Petabyte may be one of those sizes that you haven't heard a lot. Right. So what does that mean, right? You've probably heard of gigabytes, maybe even terabytes, but then we go to EXA and PETA and ZETTA and YOTTA. And so let's get an idea of sort of what does this mean? So as an analogy, we're going to say that a 1-minute MP3 music file is about 1 megabyte, right? And we'll use that as a unit of measure. And so if I had a gigabyte worth of MP3 files, you add all your music files together, you look at their total size, let's say it was a gigabyte. That means that you could effectively, at 1 megabyte a minute, listen to 16 hours of music. That's pretty cool, right? With a terabyte, though, you could listen for almost 2 years contiguously or continuously to your MP3s. If you had an exabyte of MP3 files, you'd have 2,000 years worth of listening pleasure queued up for you. You get to the petabyte level and you're now at 2 million years. And then into zettabyte is 2 billion years worth of music, which is amazing. If you had a yottabyte of music, well, that's a yotta music. All right, sorry. Cisco has done a study, though, and they predict that by 2016, there will be 1.3 zettabytes of data transferred over the internet. Now, that's not stored. That's a different number, but transferred. And that's pretty amazing. That says that in 2016 alone, there would be 2 billion years worth of music, at least in the volume of data, transferred back and forth over the internet. So it's pretty amazing. So, in fact, so much so that it kind of hurts your brain, right? You think about that, you go, wow, that is a ton of data. How are we going to be able to analyze and process and store all of that data? And so that's really where the cloud comes to the rescue, right? So there's a number of cloud vendors out there. But if we think of this from a device perspective, we need to have a way to do some computing and data analysis up in the cloud, right? So we've got these compute services. And usually when people talk about computing in the cloud, they break it down into either infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. And we'll come back and clarify that a little bit more. But your cloud vendors also can offer a ton of other application services: data storage, authentication, routing, streaming, whole bunch of other cool stuff. In fact, on the far right-hand side is sort of the menu of services that are available in Microsoft's Azure cloud platform. Again, data storage, mobile services, Active Directory authentication, networks and traffic managers, third-party add-ons, a whole bunch of cool stuff that's available there. I mentioned, though, these terms infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. So what do we mean by that? Well, let's say that you go out, you get your Arduino and your 3D printer, and you go ahead and you make the smart stapler. You go, this is amazing, man. This is really cool, but I need a place to capture data about the staples and the staplers that are out there. So I'm going to go, into my business. I'll take a room. I'll make sure that it's cooled. I've got power coming in. I've got network cables to get me out to the internet. I'll stick in a rack. I'll put in some physical servers and run virtual machines on those. And I'll pick what operating system I'm going to use, and I'll maintain those operating systems and keep them up to date and make sure they're secure. And then I've got to pick what programming languages and databases I'm going to use. And then I can finally write the app that's going to store this data coming back from my stapler. And so that's a lot of foundational work to get to the top, which is the application that you really just wanted to write. And so with cloud services, what we're really talking about doing is outsourcing part of that responsibility. We want our cloud vendor to take over some of that workload for us so that we don't have to do it. So the first sort of level of cloud then is really infrastructure as a service. And that's where we ask our cloud vendor to say, hey, look, just give me something that I can run a virtual machine on. You deal with the physical location, the power, the cooling, the network cables, the servers, the racks and all that kind of stuff. And you just give me a place that I can deploy a virtual machine into. And you let me either make my own virtual machine, or you let me pick some pre-configured virtual machines with the operating system that I choose. And then from there, I can, again, pick my programming frameworks and then build my application and my data. And I've kind of cut my workload almost in half. I don't have to manage the lower half of that, but I do still have to manage the operating system. I've still got to service pack it and hotfix it and make sure that it's secure and all that good stuff. And if I'm an application developer, those may not be my strengths. So that's taking my time away, but also means I may not be doing it as well as I should be. Platform as a service helps me outsource even more of that stack. I can say, hey, look, you pick the VM for me. You give me an execution environment and simply give me a way that I can deploy my code up into that. And then you figure out where and how to run that code. All I need to do is focus on my application and data. So platform as a service is definitely more convenient for the developer. Plus, your platform can automatically service pack and maintain and ensure the security of the virtual machines that your code is actually running on. So that's a great boon. One of the other big benefits of platform as a service is because we're no longer tied to the individual virtual machine. We can now run multiple copies of this very easily. So platform as a service makes it significantly simpler to scale up and scale down by adding or removing additional nodes into my cloud. As compared to infrastructure as a service where I have to have done a little more work up front to make that possible. And then the final piece would be, you know what, I don't want to write any code at all. I just want to use your stuff, right? So I just want to subscribe to some service and consume that software that's already running up there in the cloud. For Microsoft, Office 365 is an example of that. But if you think about this from a device perspective, right, maybe it's an MQTT broker service that's just running. So I don't have to go build my own MQTT broker service. I can just use one that's publicly available. So we've got various ways that we can run code up in the cloud. What about storing the data? So for data storage, go back and think of that Momoto device that was taking a picture every 30 seconds. We could have that just upload those pictures as files, into a cloud vendor. For example, in Amazon, there's S3, and on Azure, of course, we have our blob storage. So it's really like a file system up in the cloud, if you will. Or it could be that your application requires some relational data, right? We're used to these relational database management systems, and in Azure, we have the Azure SQL database. Amazon has the RDS. But relational databases have a number of transactional and just structural restrictions that are placed on them that sometimes can cause a problem with the high volume and the varied nature of data that can come in from all of these devices. And so there's sort of this movement around what generally are called NoSQL databases. In Azure, we have table storage, but there's other ones, MongoDB, Cassandra, Raven, other ones out there as well, that you could be running in your cloud environment. And then the other one is queuing, right? In fact, I mentioned that MQTT protocol, a big part of that was this queuing, or the store and forward type nature of it. And so we have these transient data stores, or queues, that we can use in the cloud. Now, on the Azure side, we have Azure Queues and Azure Service Bus that can help me build queuing mechanisms. But as we get these large volumes of data, how are we going to query them, right? So as you go back and look at this big data problem, we've got so much data. How do we store it and how do we analyze it? And in fact, big data is probably best defined by data that is too large, too fast, or too varied for you to process using your current solutions, right? So high volume, high velocity, high variety that's coming in. And so the traditional relational database engines, like SQL Server and Oracle, first of all, tend to be transactional. So every record or every change that occurs needs to be recorded for recoverability purposes. And they also tend to be very constrained. We require specific data types and specific values to have certain relationships and all that kind of stuff. And that can all put a burden on large volume, high velocity, varied data flows. So that's where this new NoSQL movement has come in, right? We have things like Cassandra or MongoDB, et cetera, that allow us to take in higher velocity, higher volume, and varied data because we don't place those transactional and other constraints on the data itself. So they can help me store it, but I still have a querying problem. And so one of the popular ways to query these large volumes of data is through this concept of map and reduce, or just MAPREDUCE. And there's a number of ways that you can run MAPREDUCE algorithms on top of your data, but one of the more popular ones is an open source project called Hadoop. And around Hadoop, there's a whole other, sort of ecosystem of languages and storage mechanisms and clustering tools, et cetera, that exist, as well as a number of third-party Hadoop services. For example, Azure offers an HD Insight service, which is basically Hadoop in the cloud. Cloudera is another third-party Hadoop vendor that's out there. And they basically give you a mechanism to, first of all, specify the data that you want to analyze, but then also create these MAPREDUCE workloads on top of that data. And so with MAPREDUCE, we can take this input of a large set of data. So on my slide here, the data is represented by these different colored dots, right? The blues and the purples and the yellows and the oranges. And let's say that each different color really meant a different type of device, right? The smart stapler, the smart hole punch, the smart staple remover, right? The smart binding machine, whatever. And let's take that even further and say that each dot really means, a million of those devices. So I've got millions and millions of different kinds of devices out there stored that I want to analyze. And so the first thing that I want to do is, let's say I simply want to count how many of each device I have. There's a pretty simple question. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a map of that data and sort of break them down by their color, right? So let's first segregate them so I get these individual groups of devices by type, right? All the blue devices, all the purple, all the yellow, and all the orange. And so that's now a process that would run on one or more machines that take that large data set and break it down into these constituent groups. And then on top of those groups, I could say, now what I want to do is really reduce that raw information or that raw data into information. And the information I want is the count. Give me a count of how many devices are in each one of those groupings there. And then take the results of those reduce calls and aggregate them back together into my output. And so the map functions and the reduce functions could each be distributed across multiple processors. So we could spin this out into this whole cluster of various nodes that are computing this answer in parallel for me. And then Hadoop or other MAPREDUCE execution environments like HD Insight can help me manage those different workloads and keep track of them, help me aggregate the results, and bring them back together into the simple answer of 16 blues, 12 purples, 12 yellows, and 9 oranges. So hopefully you see that we have a number of answers for a lot of the problems that are out there. That doesn't mean we have them all, but hopefully in this session I've gotten you to think about that. We started out looking at just what the Internet of Things is and how we sort of are looking to evolve into the Internet of Everything. Talked about some of the different terminology as well as sort of the value that's out there for you to gain access to. Talked about some of the cool different devices and things, as well as what are making those things possible. Talked about the networking standards and protocols, as well as how cloud computing and big data can help us deal with the volume of information that's going to come out of this. So with that, thank you for your time. Hopefully you found this enlightening. Again, my name is Brett Statham. You can find me on the web at brettstatham.com. And again, grab a copy of the slides using the link at the bottom of the screen. Thank you.